All right, let's jump right in. We're tackling a massive subject today, the thousands, and I mean thousands of religions that have shaped human history. It's this huge, sprawling landscape of belief, and the big question is, how do we even begin to make sense of it all? I mean, that really is the central question, right? You've got literally thousands of belief systems stretching all the way back through human history. We're talking everything from ancient tribal customs to the major global faiths we know today. It can feel, well, pretty overwhelming. So, where do you even start? How do the people who study this stuff even begin to wrap their heads around it? Okay, so here's how we start to tackle it. To find our way through this incredible complexity, we need systems. We need ways to classify things. Think of it like this. You wouldn't explore a new continent without a map, right? Well, these classification systems are our maps for the world of human belief. Or maybe think of them as different lenses. Each one you look through shows you the same landscape but highlights totally different features. And wow, there are a lot of ways to draw those maps. You can see here just a few of the approaches. You could group them by geography, Eastern versus Western religions. That's a classic one. Or you could group them by their origin story, which gives you the Abrahamic faith, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all sharing a common prophetic tradition. Now, some of these other systems, they're pretty dated. Things based on race or this idea of primitive versus advanced, we see those as really problematic and overly simplistic today. But it's still important to know they existed, because it shows all the different ways people have tried to bring some kind of order to this massive puzzle. And that really gets to the heart of it. No single system is perfect, not even close. I mean, think about it. Lumping all non-Abrahamic religions into one bucket, that's an impossibly huge and diverse group. But, and this is the key, even with their flaws, these frameworks are essential tools. They're what allow us to even begin studying this stuff, to see the patterns and the connections that would otherwise just be lost in the noise. So for the rest of our time here, we're going to zero in on one of these big foundational classifications. It's a distinction that's, well, let's just say it's highly debated now, but it's historically super important. We're talking about the difference between what scholars once called primitive and advanced religions. Now, understanding this old framework is really key because it helps us get a handle on what might be the very building blocks of early religious thought. Okay, so what on earth did these early scholars mean by a term like primitive religion? And we have to be super clear here. In this academic context, this wasn't meant as a value judgment, like one is worse than another. It was a technical term they used to describe belief systems that, for the most part, don't have sacred books or a really systematic written down theology. Instead, you've got these incredible sets of customs and rituals, all passed down orally from one generation to the next. So let's break that down a bit more. The big things to look for are no sacred texts, no complex systematic theology. It's not about studying a book, it's about doing. The belief is lived out through rituals passed down through the generations. The philosophy is often more direct, more immediate, things like honoring your ancestors or a deep connection to the natural world. And for scholars, looking at these systems is like looking back in time, trying to piece together how religion itself might have gotten started. Okay, now we get to the really cool stuff, the building blocks. If you look across these early belief systems, you see three concepts pop up again and again and again: totem, taboo, and mana. Seriously, get these three down and you've got the key to understanding this entire way of thinking.
All right, first up, the totem. The word itself actually comes from Native American languages. So what is it? Well, you can think of it as a symbol for a tribe, usually an animal or a plant. But it's so much more than just a mascot. It's a sacred emblem, the thing that represents the tribe's very identity, its origins, and its connection to the world around it.
And what's fascinating is that the totem works on two totally different levels. On the one hand, there's the social side. The totem governs things like bloodlines and even marriage laws. A lot of the time, you can't marry someone who has the same totem as you. Then, on the other hand, you have the ritual dimension. This is all about respecting the totem. You don't harm it, you don't eat it, except maybe in a very specific, very sacred ceremony. Okay, so if the totem is about what holds a tribe together, our next concept, taboo, is about what's strictly off limits. The word comes from Polynesian languages, and it's basically a powerful, sacred prohibition. Breaking a taboo isn't just bad manners, it's considered genuinely dangerous because the thing you're not supposed to touch or do is seen as either incredibly sacred or incredibly impure. And that brings us to our third building block, mana. This is another word from Polynesia, and it's a bit more abstract. Mana is this hidden, invisible force. It's not a god, it's not a spirit. It's more like a fundamental power that can exist inside certain objects, people, or places. It's what gives them their special status or their power. A great warrior might be said to have a lot of mana, but a strangely shaped rock or a particularly effective spear could have mana too. So when you put these ideas together, they can lead to two kind of different but related worldviews. First, you have animism. This is the belief that pretty much all of nature is alive with spirit. The river has a spirit, the mountain has a spirit, the trees, the sky, it's all conscious. Then you have fetishism, which is a little more focused. This is the belief that specific objects, like a carved piece of wood or a special stone, contain magical power. They're like batteries of mana that can be used to influence things. Okay, so we've been talking about some pretty abstract concepts. Totems, mana. How does this stuff actually play out in the real world, in a big, complex civilization? Well, let's take a look at a perfect case study, ancient Egypt. Because here you can see how these foundational ideas can grow and evolve into an incredibly sophisticated state religion. If you look at the long history of ancient Egypt, you can actually see this evolution happen in stages. It seems to have started with these early animistic-style beliefs. Then, that developed into the worship of local gods, and hey, look at that, so many of them were in animal form. Lions, crocodiles, cows. You can see a clear echo of totemism right there. From there, it grew into a super complex mythology with epic gods like Osiris and Isis. And finally, it all culminated in the worship of the pharaohs themselves as living gods on earth, descended from the sun. And really, at the absolute core of all Egyptian mythology is this one incredible story, the myth of Osiris. So you have Osiris, the good king, who gets murdered by his jealous brother, Set. His wife, the powerful Isis, finds his body. But Set finds it again, and in a rage, tears it into 14 pieces and scatters them all over Egypt. It seems like all is lost. But their son, Horus, grows up, and he's not having it. He defeats Set in a mighty battle. And then, Horus manages to bring Osiris back to life, who then becomes the ruler of the underworld. I mean, what a story. And this wasn't just a soap opera. It explained everything: the cycle of death and rebirth, the annual flooding of the Nile, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. So, if you boil it all down, ancient Egyptian worship was this amazing mix of different layers all existing at once. You had those local, animal-like deities. You had the huge, mythological gods from stories like the Osiris myth. You had this intense worship of the sun as the ultimate source of life. And tying it all together, you had the worship of the pharaoh, who was seen as the sun god's own child on earth. All right, so we've gone on quite a journey, right? From these basic concepts all the way to the grand civilization of Egypt. So let's circle all the way back to where we started. Why does any of this matter? Why do we even bother with these labels and classifications in the first place? Here's the bottom line. These classification systems, there are maps, and just like any map, they aren't the territory itself. They're simplified, they have flaws, they can't show you every little detail. But without them, we'd be completely lost. They are the essential tools that let us navigate this vast landscape, to spot the patterns, to trace how ideas evolve, and to even begin to grasp the incredible, sprawling, fascinating story of human belief. And that kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. Think about your own life. When you knock on wood for good luck, or maybe you avoid walking under a ladder, or you feel that swell of pride for a national symbol, are you just maybe seeing the tiniest, faintest echoes of these ancient ideas? A little bit of mana for good luck? A modern-day taboo? A symbol that unites your tribe? It's pretty wild to think about how these ancient ways of seeing the world might still be shaping our lives today. Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.